Thank you, Minister, for your presentation. I would like to invite you to have a seat here because to join us for the first panel in which you will be an important member of it. My name is Hernan Rodriguez. I'm a Chile Day board member, and I will be moderating the following panel that, as the Minister mentioned, it's one very relevant issue that Chile now is facing, how our permitting system that we refer in Spanish as permisología is impacting investment projects all across our country. This is really not a new conversation. The permitting system has been under scrutiny for quite some time. In fact, in 2016, when presenting the conclusions from a Presidential Advisory Commission for reforming the Environmental Evaluation Service, Paulo Baderier, then Minister of Environment, said, "We've presented the President with a robust set of proposals for a more efficient environmental evaluation process, one that maintains high technical standards, but above all, provides greater legal certainty to communities, project developers, and the various public agencies involved." That was 9 years ago. So the question we face today, how far have we really come since then? The stakes are high. A recent study by the think tank CEP estimated that delays in permit approvals cost Chile roughly 0.7% of annual growth. There are clear examples providing the system is not working as it should. The Dominga mining project has been strangled in legal and administrative issues for more than 12 years. The Los Lagos hydroelectric plant is fully constructed since 2021, but still not operating. The Valparaíso port expansion is facing an overwhelming number of processes legal and has been stuck for 11 years. The National Cancer Institute is also facing an overwhelming number of requirements, including insect habitats, Japanese photosynthesis methods in urban gardens, and paleontology protocols. And it's located right in the middle of Santiago. And not to mention the Penco rare earth project that has been under scrutiny for just 5 naranjillos out of a population of almost 500,000. In response, we heard that Minister of Economy is leading a bill aimed of cutting permitting times by 30 to 70%. However, many argue that this reform doesn't go far enough, that a more radical shift is needed, starting with a deep restructuring in the Environmental Evaluation Service. To explore this issue in depth, we are honored to have a distinguished panel with us today. And alongside Minister Grau, we are joined by Mr. Alejandro Tapia, who's president of BHP Escondida, and Mr. Bernardo Larraín, chairman of CNPC and Pivotes. Thank you, Minister Alejandro and Bernardo, for being with us today. And to kick things off, before going into the Q&A, I would like to have each of you like a 4 to 5 minutes maximum initial thoughts about the issue, and I will enforce the maximum. And I will start with Alejandro, and then Bernardo, and then the minister, if he can say something before the Q&A. So, Alejandro, you can start.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here in the panel today. And let me build on what Minister Grau has shared before. We do things that Chile needs to create the right incentives to attract investments, but also to continue supporting economic growth. And we in BHP has been part of that growth and economic development over the last 30 years. As a matter of fact, currently our operations Escondida and Spence in Chile represent 27% of total Chilean copper production, and that makes us the highest taxpayer in the country. And we want to continue to be part of that growth in the future years. Minister of Finance, Mario Marcel, visited Escondida a few months ago, and we shared our growth plans, more than 10 billion across Chile for investments. And his comment was, BHP investment will truly move the needle with the right conditions. And that's important. And I want to connect through over my opening comments, mining, permitting, and the opportunity we have in front of us. And which is huge. And it's not only for our company or for the industry, it's for Chile. In BHP, we have estimated that copper demand will grow by 70% by 2050. That's equivalent to 20 Escondida mines. Escondida mine is the largest operation in the world by far. So just imagine to replace all that production. Not only additional production, we need to offset the declining rates in the current facilities. So if Chile wants to attract additional investments, need to act with a sense of urgency. And that's mean legal stability, fiscal stability, but also super important and efficient and a fast permitting system that Mr. Grau already referred to. We do highlight, as Minister Grau also mentioned it, the improvements in the current sectoral reform, which provides an institutional framework for a better and more integrated system, and also create some tools, like the administrative silence, alternative enabling techniques, and also the regulatory framework that are definitely positive in that aspect. But also more important is the dialogue that also Minister Grau mentioned that is behind this reform. The dialogue between the Congress, the private sector, and the government has definitely improved the bill, but also has strengthened the system as a whole. And we truly believe that will facilitate and expedite the implementation of the reform. But there is always more to do. And this is what I want to reinforce. Part of the reform is also the modification of the environmental assessment system, the CIA that is known in Chile. And this is currently discussed in the Congress. But if we really want to act with a sense of urgency and show a clear change in the permitting approach, what we need to do is, regardless of the conversation in the Congress, is to make modification. And I want to close with this. Currently, the permitting system in Chile doesn't differentiate between new projects and existing projects. And we can do that by modifying the regulation of the law. Out of the 575 permits in the mining industry submitted in the last 10 years, 53% are just modifications. It's quite a large number. And what it creates, Minister, and you've mentioned this, it creates a bottleneck in the services, in the public services responsible for the approval of these permits. It doesn't improve or protect more the environmental, just create a bottleneck. So I will recap here.
Then we'll go for the Q&A.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alejandro. Bernardo, your initial thoughts about this issue?
Well, first of all, thank you very much to Chile Day for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with Alejandro and Minister Grau talking about this important subject. Let me start by telling you the message. I hope after the conversation in this panel, we would be able to convey, which is, I think it's an optimistic message. It's basically saying that in the context that Ambassador Valdez described at his initial words, capital will be reallocated. And I think Chile has a huge opportunity for that to be one of the destinies, to be one of the preferred destinies of that capital. And not only capital, but also trade flows. So that's a certainty that this will change, and Chile has a huge opportunity to capture, to benefit from this change. And this is the first good news. And the second good news, I think, is that everybody acknowledges in Chile, government, opposition, business community, the candidates, we are in the process of elections, of campaigns, everybody acknowledged that we have a problem. And Mr. Gauss, the first phrase he said in his word was, we have a problem. And because I think this is important because starting from a realistic diagnosis is the way to build optimism. You cannot build optimism just on voluntaristic wishes. So I think it's very important to start with a realistic diagnosis. So that's the second message, which is very important. And the third message is that I think we not only have a common diagnosis in all the sectors, but also we are starting to do the homework, basically. And think two examples of that, Minister Grau just explained the main contents of the bill to improve, to modernize all the sectorial permitting processes. And it's not only a good bill, I think, and I hope, as well as the minister hope, that it will be approved in the next few weeks. But also it was basically what we have today as a bill came from a proposal from the ministry, came from a good work with the Senate. Senator Rojo Edwards led that effort and collaborated with the minister. Senator Rojo is from the opposition to the government of Minister Grau. So that's a good signal that if you get together, if you collaborate, you could end up with a good bill. So I think it's important to congratulate Minister Grau, Senator Edwards, and all the senators that participated in that conversation, because we're getting to a good bill. So that's one example that we're doing the homework. And the second example that we have high expectations is that Minister Marcel announced that there was going to be another bill. Not only a bill, I understand there will also be some administrative measures called something like short bill for activating investment. We don't know yet the contents, but we have high expectations on that because we cannot stop, basically. We are in election campaign, but still, and the business community will support the government, I think, on any initiative that basically look for the goal of expediting permitting process. So that's what I wanted to say initially, and let me say one thing which is for obvious, maybe, so not for being obvious, it's less important. Basically, investment, I think, is one of the main public goods that any government in any part of the world should enable. Why? Because it creates jobs, it basically pays taxes, as Alejandro said. Not only that, but also around investment projects, ecosystems of entrepreneurs and contractors are organized. And not only that, but also when you establish the business capacities in the different parts of Chile, that business capacities are also supporting educational initiatives, health initiatives, and even conservation initiatives. And I think BHP presence in Chile is a very good example of that. That not only has great minds, but also is doing a lot of investment in social education, cultural things. And that's why investment, I'm pretty sure, is the main public good that any government should enable. And when I use the word enable, I think I use it consciously, because I think, personally, that governments and state should not, let's say, offer investment, should not plan investment, should not execute investment, but they should enable investments. And how investment is enabled? By providing certainties, by providing an institutional framework, a regulatory framework that enables for companies to concentrate on taking risk, on executing projects, on doing engineering or conveying new technologies, and not, as Minister said, having big teams, trying to deal with complexities in the regulatory process. And let me just finish with some examples. Hernan mentioned some examples. Let me add some others, which reflects the huge opportunity we have, but at the same time the problem we have. So Chile has, as you know, the largest reserves of lithium in the world. Not only the largest one, but also the most competitive ones. And in the last decade, we have not been able to open a new operation of lithium, except for the 2 operations that we have in the Atacama Desert. Rio Tinto just announced, so Rio Tinto had to wait for the state through Codelco to invite them to just now start pre-feed studies for a lithium project in the Salar de Maricunga. And why is that? Because, and that's I think it's a mistake that Chile has taken this approach, because lithium is not a concessionable mineral. It's the only mineral that is not concessionable. So in copper, if Rio Tinto wants to do some exploration, they ask for a concession early on, and they invest based on the certainty of that legal instrument, the concession. In Chile, in lithium, they have to wait for the Codelco to invite them to do a joint venture. How much time did we waste on that? Why don't we have a serious discussion about making lithium concessionable as all other minerals? That's one example, and just one last example, Hernan, if you allow me. in
10
our
se-
industry,
10 seconds
the
example.
forestry industry. We have, and we've talked this about with the minister, and I think the Ministry of Economy has good ideas about this. We have 1 million hectares in Chile which has not been replanted. These are hectares which the only vocation they have is forestry. They cannot be used for farming. It's a different kind of hectares. And while Brazil is extending the forestry plantations in many states of Brazil, in Chile has been stagnated for a long time. And those million hectares are in the hands of small owners. It's not the big companies that own the big, and they don't have incentives to replant those hectares, based on fires, on occupation. So we should have a public policy to reactivate the plantation of hectares, and as Brazil maybe try to hold the large pulp projects like the ones that are being developed in Brazil. So I stop in that.
Thank you, Bernardo. And Minister, you want to start with some thoughts before the Q&A?
Yeah, very fast.
short.
Well, in the case of forestry, we are agree. Okay, this is the opportunity and the challenge that we have. What we are doing right now is trying to rethink the way that we can replant and given the opportunity that is coming from this demand of carbon capture that the world has. I think in Chile we have a huge opportunity, and it's going to require, and this is exactly what we're doing, a lot of public and private coordination to do so. So we agree with that. In the case of lithium, I do not agree, fully agree at least, but let me tell you that the strategy that we're doing, and we start from nothing, basically, when we start the government, as opposed as in the case, for example, of green hydrogen, where basically the previous administration has, in my opinion, a very nice and well thought strategy that basically we follow. In the case of lithium was not the case. But at the end of our government, we're going to have probably the contract signed for different new operations that are going to allow us to double the production in 1 decade. So we can have differences in terms of what is the best institutional framework for lithium. But given the framework that we have, we're going to be able to double the production. I think this is a very good news. And probably the agreement between Codelco and SQM and Codelco and Rio Tinto are the most important agreement in many years. So we're very proud about what Codelco is doing in that, and we hope that ENAMI is going to do something similar. About this, to say more words about optimism that I want to emphasize. It is true that investment in Chile has been stagnant for a few years. Okay, not just during our government. If you see, this is something that is a longer period, basically. But if you see this year, 2025 is going to increase by 3% or even more. Okay, and if you see the second part of this decade is going to be much better. I mean, if you see the CVC pipeline of projects that they have, or if you see the data of the environmental assessment institution, okay? Basically we have a very big pipeline of different projects. That's why, and this is not a reason to say we are perfect. It's the opposite. I mean, if the permitting process is not working well and we have a lot of projects in the pipeline, we have to solve that problem. When in my job during these 3 years and so, I have been in different countries talking with a lot of investors, and the top one problem by far is the permitting problem that we have in Chile. That's why we have focused not just with the reform that I'm leading. There is a reform in the environmental assessment. In the case of Monumentos Nacionales, I don't know how to say that. In the case of maritime concessions, I mean, this is a broad agenda trying to face this challenge that we have in Chile. And I think this is the bottleneck that we have. Being said that, I think it's also relevant to think the following. 40 years ago in Chile, the permitting was not an issue, and Chile was not growing that much. So I'm saying that to just to emphasize that permitting is not the only problem that we have. If you see that the numbers of Marfan Commission, okay, and you try to think how we can go from growing 2.5 to growing 4%, for example, the permitting can solve 1/5 of the problem, more or less. Okay? So we also need to discuss what are the other 4/5 of the problem, and not to reduce all the conversation, all the economic conversation on permitting, even though at least half of my time is focusing on that, because this is the order that I got from the president. But yeah.
Minister, let me take a couple of points that you mentioned. Investment. Bernardo mentioned that one of the key roles of the government is enabling investment, and something that I mentioned also in the introduction, which is the impact on growth. And CEP estimates that the impact is about 0.7% of reduction in the annual growth, and given today that we are growing something between 2 and 2.5%, that's 1/3 of the growth. Does the government have any studies or hard data on the potential increase in growth and job creation that we could achieve as a country if the environmental evaluation system were more agile and efficient?
The estimation that we have that is coming from that commission said the following, more or less. If you reduce the time, no matter whether this is a sectoral permit time or environmental assessment time, I mean, if you reduce the time by 30%, okay, you can increase the growth by 0.224 percentage point every year, which add more or less 2.5% in 10 years. This is the estimation. How they reach this number, because it's not that easy to do this estimation, they do the following. They try to make a map between time, okay, a reduce in the van. I don't know how to say that in English.
Net present value.
Yeah.
NPV.
And taxes, okay. And given in the academic literature, you know what could be the impact of profit taxes on growth, on investment, okay. That's how they make this estimation. I think that if you take different measures of our law, maybe the impact is going to be bigger, because first, we're going to reduce the time more than 30%, okay? And second, for example, in that case, we are not measuring the effect of this stability in the regulatory system, okay? It is also so difficult to measure the signals, the aim of the player. So I think that if we enter in another type of conversation through this law and other laws that we're pushing as a government, I think the impact is going to be bigger. But this is the formal study that we have to support our law.
Okay, now we'll go to Alejandro, because Alejandro, you mentioned about the potential in copper demand, and we're also seeing that the competition among copper producing countries is very intense. And you also spoke about the sense of urgency that must prevail in order to take advantage of this current positive demand cycle. But you also mentioned that since we are not reforming the environmental evaluation system, that we're just going into the sectoral system, how can we take, as a country, advantage of the market opportunity that you mentioned, given the fact that we are just addressing the sectoral permit and not the whole environmental evaluation system?
Briefly, probably, as I mentioned, one of the key issues today, as we work before we solve the root cause, is the bottleneck that we have in some of these public services, not only at national level, but at regional level. What we can do, and there are good examples in the region of Antofagasta. Antofagasta is the city and the region close to most of the mining operations, is that we can reinforce the resources, the number of resources in those services, but also the capability of the people. I think if we implement...
We're doing that, actually.
Yeah. And actually
with the governor.
Yeah, exactly. I want to highlight that. The regional government of Antofagasta plus the central government, and this is an isolated example, has added like a 64 plus people into resources. So we can do more of that. In the meantime, we'll definitely earn expedite part of the processes.
Okay. Bernardo, question for you, and it's related to Pivotes, because, which is, by the way, the public policy advocacy center that you founded. You say that, that to shed light on certain national crises and challenges, one of which is that dynamic and sustainable growth supported by our natural resources. Pivotes also emphasizes that it is urgent to challenge the negative perception of extractivism and recognize its added value, and that we must balance environmental permits, citizen participation, and legal certainty. What must the country do to reinvigorate its natural resource-based economy?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is to eliminate our vocabulary the words extractivism and rent-seeking when talking about natural resources. We should not further stigmatize those industries which are the main source of growth for Chile for the next decade. And not only that, but also those are products that are demanded by the world to basically comply with their challenges of decarbonization, energy transition, and carbon neutrality. So that's the first thing. I think anybody who goes to a mine and anybody who goes to the R&D lab of a forestry company would know how much technology, how much innovation, and how much value added these industries have. We are not exporting stones, basically. There's a lot of value added in that. So that's the first point. We've talked about we have to, the state have to enable, I think, the whole life cycle of a project. When you think about the mining project, it starts very early on, as well as a forestry project. You have to start buying land, plantating forest very early on. So you have to basically reduce uncertainty from that very early stages. And that's why I think that, for instance, that early stages required a legal instrument for mining companies to prospect the land. And that's why it's been so successful, the mining sector in Chile, based on concessions. I don't know why lithium is the only exception. There's no place in the world, except for Chile and Bolivia, where concessions are not the rule. I'm very optimistic, and I really wish that Codelco with SQM and Codelco with Rio Tinto succeed. That's good for Chile. But there's so many other sub-lakes that we have to, why not, enter into that discussion. I'm sure that if we have concessions in lithium, there will be much more different companies prospecting different sub-lakes and appraisal the environmental conditions for those operations to be really sustainable. It's better to have many companies and not only one road to extract lithium. Today we have two roads basically, which is Codelco, SQM, Codelco, Rio Tinto, and we should have 20 roads. Why? Because in these sectors, companies have a huge portfolio of projects, and the ones that ended up, being executed are a fraction of those. So you better have many companies prospecting to then end up with the best project to be developed. But you have to start with a lot of projects being studied. And that's another thing that I would like to comment on what Minister Grau said. When you look on these numbers of the number of projects that Chile has potentially, is very important, and that's why I'm saying we have to be optimistic. But equally important is to see what is the likelihood of execution in a certain time frame that those projects will be executed. So I think, and the big reform which is pending, and I think humbly that the bill that is in the Congress today to change the environmental impact system is not really doing the work. So I think we should start from zero that discussion. And the environmental impacts that Pivote, the reform that Pivote is proposing is basically to have a possibility for projects in all these sectors and many others to enter the system early on, to get some resolutions, which are mandatory resolutions, like early on. So projects today, they have to do detailed engineering to enter the system. They take 4 years to only enter the system, and they present environmental impact studies of 1,000 pages. The probability of some mistakes, some omissions, it's 100%, because there's so much detail which is not needed to appraise environmental impacts, they may be needed to build the project, but not to appraise environmental impact. So what we propose is a first stage of pre-screening that ends with the resolution of the environmental service on certain issues, like what is the area of influence of the project? Many times you think the area of influence is this, and then 4 years later you learn, because the authorities say so, that the area of influence should be this, the whole country. Or you have to define early on what are the communities that should be consulted and which are not the communities should be consulted. What are the NGOs that are enabled to participate? Many countries like Switzerland, they have a requirement for NGO to participate. How is your financing? They have a requirement for transparency. They have to have a kind of background in the sector. They have to have a trajectory in Chile. You cannot build an NGO just to pose a project, as it is the case in Chile. So all those definitions, we propose that should be taken early on through a resolution. And then, in the second stage, we propose to go to the really technical evaluation, saying what are the mitigations required, what are the compensations required. But that second stage takes place once you have already defined the viability of the project, which is not the case today. So the example that Hernan mentioned, Dominga, they learned 13 years afterwards that maybe the port they were planning should have been a bit farther away from a conservation area. Why they didn't say that, early on, at the very beginning? It's crazy. And the same thing happened with the polemic about this green hydrogen project of AS Corp with the observatory being built. Why they didn't say at the very beginning, in a definitive way, that, I don't know, a green hydrogen project should not be as close to an observatory? That project is complying with the norm. There's a new norm about distance between green hydrogen or any other project and observatories. But now, very late in the process, they're saying, look, apparently it was too close.
Minister, something we have no doubt that the bill you are enforcing is very significant towards a better regulatory environment for investment. But as we have mentioned, the environmental evaluation system is not among this year's priorities. Last week in an interview, Sebastian Edwards pointed out that awareness of the permitting issue has grown, which is good. But the approach being taken is extraordinarily timid. He says that we are going nowhere with this system if something takes 10 years and you're reducing by 30% to 7 years means or changes nothing, basically. And as a minister that you are strongly committed to promoting growth, do you consider this good or bad news? Why the government is not prioritizing the reform of the changing the environmental evaluation system? Isn't it this reform the mother of all battles to unblock the permitting system, addressing the points that, for instance, Bernardo just mentioned?
I am a quantitative person, okay? So let me just re-emphasize that in a mining project, the environmental assessment is 1/3, the sectoral part is 2/3. Okay? So I think both are important, but we are addressing, I think, with success, the part that in big projects could be the most important, and is the one where the possibility of an agreement is easier, basically. So it's a pragmatic approach.
Okay.
Okay. If you ask me or you ask the government whether it's relevant to have a change in the environmental assessment part, we think so. That's why we presented a law. But it is also true that it's not that easy to get an agreement in that part. Okay? That's why we discuss a lot, for example, with Senator Edwards, also with Senator Saavedra, that they are present here. Why not to put all these two reforms together? And in my opinion, that was not a good idea, because basically if
We'll be stuck.
you know that there is a general mathematical idea that it says that when you have a complex problem, you can solve that problem divided in many easier problems. Okay, and this is exactly what we're doing. We're trying to divide the problem and to focus on the part, or trying to accelerate the part that is easier, because it took us a lot of time of work in any case, but at least it's easier to get an agreement. Okay? Saying something general about the environmental assessment part, I think I say that I think because we haven't talked about this in a deep way, but I think I have some similar ideas to Bernardo in which sense. I think that one approach to deal with the environmental assessment part is to start earlier, with more participation of the community in a stage where the community can say something that is going to have impact. Okay? But once that impact it happens, okay, then you reduce the possibility of going to the court or any other problem. You reduce the conflict in the future. This is something that we are already trying without changing the law. At least we are doing this pilot that could be useful for this type of conversation in the future. For example, like 3 weeks ago, I talked to Nordex, one of the firms that are designing a project of green hydrogen in Magallanes, and they just finished a process with early participation, right, with the community, 1 or 2 years before entering the environmental assessment part, and they were very happy about that process. Okay? What they report, I haven't talked to the community, but what they report about the feedback of the community is also very, very positive. So I do think that there is a possibility where both, let's say, both sides of the problem, of the challenge, wins. The community, because they can impact in a stage of the project where basically not everything is defined, so there is something to discuss, something meaningful to discuss. And the firm wins because they get certainty, okay? And they get support from the community. What is difficult, I can tell you this, if there is a conflict between the community and a big project, no matter what is your institutional framework, this is going to be a problem. Okay? So we need to channel the conflict. We need to reduce the conflict through an institutional framework that is useful to do so. So I think that there is a way to address the discussion in the case of the environmental assessment part, where maybe everybody's going to be agree. Okay? But for sure, it's more challenging than our project. The challenge in our project is not how to get an agreement, it's how to design. There are many laws to change, a lot of work. Okay? But in the case of the environmental assessment part, I think there is a political challenge. Okay? And I will suggest that the private sector talk a lot with at least some part of the environmental organizations, and trying to find a way to have an agreement where everybody wins. I do think that is possible. Okay? And I know that the approach that we have followed as a government is having some difficulties. Okay? This is a reality, but at least I think it's pretty clear that we acknowledge that the problem is in all these parts. Otherwise, we wouldn't submit the law that we did.
Okay. Alejandro, the minister just mentioned that at least in the mining sector, 1/3 is going into the environmental license, and 2/3 of the time goes into the sectoral permits. And connecting that the BHP has already announced a very ambitious capex plan in Chile of approximately $13 billion US. And in the Escondido operation, the one you lead takes for about a bit less than 80% of that amount. Could you comment on those projects? What stage are they in? But very short. And what complexities do you foresee that could potentially delay that development?
Yeah, of course. In November last year, we presented to the market and to the investors our growth programs for Chile. Not only for Escondida represents around $10.8 billion US. To be executed over the next 8 to 10 years, but also spends.
Small.
Yeah, exactly. Also spends with around 1.3 billion, and Cerro Colorado, which currently is in care and maintenance, and we're going through how we extend or restart that operation around 2028 with another 1.3 billion US dollars. So it's a substantial amount of money to be invested in the next 8 to 10 years. Critical, of course, is the permits. Because it's true, when you have one permit for one operation, it represents 1/3 and 2/3 of the equation. But when you have, in Escondida, we need to expand or modify the full footprint of what we have, because our harness, because the facilities are coming to the end of the life. So it's not one permit, you start to have the sequencing of the different permits. There is another constraint in the current system. So where we are today, we have submitted one DIA in February this year for the first expansion, and we have a set of different DIAs planned in the next month. Critical is if one is rejected because they are insidious, you start to lose and you start to defer the full program. So yes, permit is an enabler, but it's a risk at the moment, Hernan. And I echo your comment. I really like, we entered the system too late in the process. Too late when you have spent years and a lot of money as well and effort. So if we can have an early signal of admissibility of the projects, will definitely help.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm allowed to ask just one question, and let's take advantage that the Minister of Finance left the room. Because
He's always here.
No, he left the
Yeah.
room. So let's take advantage of that, because he mentioned last week that he's working with you and the Minister of Mining on a fast-track approval plan, and they call for projects that are either in an advanced stage of environmental processing or are significant enough in size or environmental impact. Could you provide some details or some insights regarding what's this about, and whether it's going to be some administrative issues or it has to go through Congress?
Yeah, there are different things. One is that when you see 2025, okay, you could see that there are about in all Chilean regions, there are about 200, 220, let's say, important projects that we are following them. Okay? We have a team in the Ministry of Economy whose work is basically talking with all the sectoral institutions to agree with them when is going to be the answer. Okay? If the system work well, we shouldn't do that, basically. But since it's not working well, we need to do this micromanagement to talk with all of them. In order to do that work, we think that we can give them more power. Okay, and we are thinking, and we are almost there to define how to give them more power with something that do not need to pass through the Congress, because it's something that we need for 2025. So it's one of the main consequences of what Minister Marcel said is basically we want to be sure that the investment that is waiting for their opportunity by 2025 is going to be there. And that requires, again, a lot of micromanagement, but also require enough power. Okay?
But it won't be a legislative bill.
It is possible that we also go through a legislation, but for something that is going to be a complement for the other thing, which is related with some of the stuff we have discussed. So I think so. It's going to be a mix, but it's something that it should be announced by the president. But it's true. We're working. We're working on that.
We'll need to wait for June 1st.
This is one way to say it. But
Okay.
as you know, I cannot make any announcement before the president.
Well,
It's not my job.
I do have many other questions prepared, but we really ran out of time. We had a very interesting panel, so we want to thank the three of you, Minister Alejandro and Bernardo. I think that for all the audience was very interesting. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Gracias, Ministro.
Gracias, Ministro.
Gracias.
Solo quiero-